To replace the front wheel bearing on your 991 Gen 1, the first thing you will need to do is remove the wheel carrier from the suspension. Please follow the link provided at the end of this video for additional assistance with that task. If you haven't already, use a 10mm socket or wrench and remove the 3 bolts holding the dust shield to the carrier, red arrows, and remove the shield. On the non-4-wheel drive vehicles, there is a stub axle on the front that will need to be removed to get the bearing out, red arrow. Use your impact wrench and remove the 32mm nut holding the wheel nut to the stub axle, red arrow. You can insert the wheel lugs and use a pry bar to get the flange to stop turning, blue arrows. The nut is torqued to 460 Nm or 340 foot-pounds, so you're going to need to use a lot of force. With the nut removed, use a 3-arm puller to press the stub axle out from the flange. The stub axle, red arrow, will come out of the rear of the bearing. Check it for damage and clean up any corrosion on it. The axle flange is a press fit into the inner sleeve of the wheel bearing, red arrow. You want to set up your press so that you are only pressing out the flange, red arrow. You do not want to press out the inner bearing ring, blue arrow, at this point, or you will have a heck of a time getting the flange out of the bearing. Support the wheel carrier in your press so that it is level and that you have enough room for the flange to clear the bearing and carrier while you are pressing. Make sure you are pressing straight down on the wheel flange only and press it out. The inner race will come out with the flange. It will also destroy the bearing, but that is okay as you are replacing it. You will need to get the bearing off of the flange. If you are lucky, you can separate them with a bearing splitter. Our flange was on so tight that I had to cut it with an angle grinder, red arrow, to get it to release. Be very careful if you do this, as you do not want to damage the flange. Use a 13mm socket and remove the 4 bolts holding the plate onto the outer bearing face, red arrows. Now support the carrier level and with enough height for the bearing to clear, and press out the bearing. Now you want the bearing disc to fit over the entire bearing from the inside. This is what the wheel carrier will look like with the bearing pressed out. Check the inside race and make sure there is no damage. Marks from pressing in and out of the bearing are expected, but not grooves or sign that the bearing was attempting to be pressed in at an angle, red arrow. This one is fine. The magnets for the wheel speed sensor are built into the bearing. Using a bearing magnet locator, red arrow, or you can also use a paper clip, make sure you are installing the bearing in the right orientation with the magnet side towards the sensor opening. Place a new bearing, if possible, in a freezer overnight. Make sure that you are pressing on the bearing using the outside race, red arrow. If you use the inner race, blue arrow, you will destroy the bearing. Then, with the wheel carrier level and properly supported, press the new bearing into the carrier. Press the new bearing in until it is flush with the carrier. Install the plate and torque the 4 bolts to 37 Nm or 27 foot-pounds. The bearing should be flush on the rear of the carrier. Make sure you have installed the cover plate and 4 bolts before installing the flange, or you're going to need to buy another bearing and do it all again. Now support the inner race to press in the wheel flange, red arrow. With everything level, straight, and supported, press the carrier onto the flange. Installation is the reverse of removal. Install the stub axle and wheel nut. Torque the wheel nut to 460 Nm or 340 foot-pounds. You may need to wait until the car has the brakes reinstalled again to get the proper torque. You can install a few wheel studs or lugs and use a pry bar to stop it from spinning to get the proper torque. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out another video in this series.